Surviving the Applewhites, Chapter 4. When Jake and his grandfather drove in that morning, Lucille Applewhite, wearing capri pants and a billowy blue and green flowered shirt, her hair clamped on top of her head and spilling curls in every direction, hurried from the end cottage to greet them. She stood by the truck and burbled on and on to his grandfather about how glad they were to have Jake joining them and how sure she was that they could provide him with just the environment he needed. Jake climbed down from the truck, scowling his most ferocious scowl. But she only smiled. Even his silver-spiked black leather collar and his vampire zombies from the Beyond t-shirt with the skull and fangs that dripped bright red blood didn't faze her. After a while, when she didn't seem to be running down, his grandfather said he'd better be going, told Jake to behave himself, and drove hurriedly away, spitting gravel and leaving Jake standing next to the duffel bag that held everything he'd brought from Rhode Island with him. This grandfather he'd met only a few weeks ago couldn't wait to be rid of him, Jake thought. The old man was no match for the likes of Jake Simple. "Let's get you settled in your room," Lucille said, "and I'll give you the grand tour." Jake picked up his bag, but she didn't move. She just stood there, looking at him, her hands on her hips, her head to one side. Jake intensified his scowl. The combination of this particular expression and this t-shirt, even without the spiked leather collar, had totally unnerved the principal at Traybridge Middle School. Lucille sighed a long, appreciative sigh. "Oh, a radiant light being. That's what you are, a radiant light being." Jake very nearly dropped his duffel bag. "Radiant light being?" "And don't ever let anyone tell you different." There were plenty of people who would be happy to tell him different, he thought. He tried to imagine his social worker back in Rhode Island calling him a radiant light being. She had never called him anything, he thought, not even his name. Mostly, whenever she had to deal with him, she just sighed a lot and shook her head. This poet woman must be seriously crazy. The sooner he got out of here, the better. She turned and started back towards the end cottage. "You'll be bunking with Archie and me in our extra room. I hope you won't mind how small your room is. Think of it as cozy. I think it'll be perfect for you. It was my meditation room till we found out you were joining us. I called it my Zen cave. We brought in a bed and a dresser, of course, and it's all been—" Jake had no idea what her next words meant. "Feng shuied," it sounded like. "So the energy flow is excellent. You'll find it wonderfully centering." The cottage, like all the others spaced out in a semicircle to the left of the big house, was a silvery gray structure backed up against the woods. Its narrow porch was covered with vines, some of them so thick and powerful looking that they seemed to be in the process of pulling it down altogether. "We call this Wisteria Cottage. You can see why. It's breathtaking in April when the wisteria's in bloom." Inside, she led him into a small living room lined with bookshelves. In the middle of one shelf was a large framed photo of a man with a round, smiling, dark face, black hair, and piercing black eyes. An entire row of small, flickering candles in glass containers surrounded the photo, and a sprig of what looked like goldenrod stood in a narrow vase next to it. "My guru," she said, "Govinda Swami, a genuine old soul. You're lucky. He's coming for a visit, so you're going to get to meet him in person. You'll love him. Everybody does." Across the room to Jake's left, forming a divider between the living room and a small kitchen area, was a couch covered with a red and orange flowered throw. Where a coffee table might have been, there was a large, dark, highly polished, rounded wooden object that reminded Jake of a short, fat, shiny hippopotamus. He had never seen anything like it before. Ah, she said as he stopped to stare at the object. Beautiful, isn't it? It's my favorite of Archie's coffee tables. We're going to lose it for a while, though. He has a gallery show coming up next month, and they especially wanted this one to be in it. Coffee table? Well, you couldn't put a cup of coffee on it, of course, but then who would want to? It's wonderfully soul-filling, don't you think? That's what all of Archie's furniture is meant to be. Lucille went through an arch into a narrow hallway with two doors on one side and one on the other. She flung open the second of the two doors and stepped back. All yours, she said. Jake started into the room and stopped. It wasn't just very, very small. It was also lavender. Walls, ceiling, even the oval braided rug were all a faintly nauseating shade of lavender. The single window was framed with lavender and white striped curtains, and the bed was covered with the same material. There was a strong smell in the room that reminded him suddenly of a great great aunt who'd come to visit his mother once. Jake rubbed his nose to keep himself from sneezing. Lucille sniffed appreciatively and pointed to a bowl full of what looked like crushed dead gray weeds on the top of the dresser, which was the only thing other than the twin bed that would fit in the room. Dried lavender. Isn't the aroma wonderful? Calming, centering, just like the color. After all you've been through, this space should help you begin to breathe again. Think of it as your personal refuge. Jake dropped his bag onto the bed. Begin to breathe? Not until he opened a window and gotten rid of the stinking bowl of dead weeds. The other door on his side of the hall was a bathroom that the three of them would share, she told him, and the room across the hall was her and Archie's bedroom. Now, you want to unpack and get yourself settled, or would you like to go over to the house and check out the schoolroom? Schoolroom, Jake said, rubbing his nose again. The schoolroom was the wing that had been added onto the side of the house to be the office for the old motor lodge, Lucille told him. It looked pretty much like a schoolroom, except that there was no teacher's desk and no blackboards. There were bookshelves spilling over with books, and there were 4 school desks, the kind that with the top that lifted up and the seat attached. 3 of them were piled high with papers and books, the other ones empty except for a mug holding pens and pencils. The walls were covered with cork, to which papers were pinned several layers deep. There were hand-drawn maps, poems, and stories written on lined paper, drawings in crayon or paint or colored markers, and lots of finger paintings full of unidentifiable shapes in intense rainbow of colors. A huge chart labeled "The Butterfly Project" hung at the front of the room. Photographs of butterflies were taped to it, and next to each photograph was a printed paragraph. All the way across one wall was a banner that read, "Education is an adventurous quest for the meaning of life, involving an ability to think things through. Z. Applewhite." Jake didn't think anyone in any school he'd ever been to would have agreed with that definition. Here and there around the room were vases full of dying wildflowers. Along one wall, an old door, complete with doorknob, lay across 2 bright red filing cabinets to form a long desk. On it, almost lost in a litter of notebooks, file folders, and computer disks, CDs, and bits of scribbled-on paper, were a computer printer and scanner. Hal has his own computer in his room, so you'll have to share this with the other 3. Edie made a sign-up sheet for a computer time, Lucille said. It's around here somewhere. The sound of a chainsaw started up outside. That'll be Archie. He's a lark. Early to bed, early to rise. Lucille checked her watch. Oh, dear. Randolph is bound to yell. He's an owl, you know. Hates to wake up before 10. Lucille began clearing things off one of the desks now. This will be yours. Hal never uses it anyways. I'll see what supplies I can find for you. Edie will tell you later what she's working on. You and she will be a class. Jake sighed. If he had to be paired with someone for however long he was going to be here, he'd rather it be Cordelia. Hammering began somewhere above, followed shortly by heavy pounding that sounded like fists on a door. A voice roared down, "Stop that infernal noise! First Archie, now you? Is everybody mad around here? It's the cracking of the dawn." A child's voice began singing, "Pop goes the weasel," loudly and slightly off key. "Sounds like everybody's up," Lucille said. Heavy footsteps came down the stairs, followed in a few moments by others. Voices came from the kitchen, along with considerable clattering and banging of dishes. The hammering, which had stopped briefly, began again. "Pop Goes the Weasel" gave way to "Hickory-dickory-dock." Jake leaned against a bookshelf full of encyclopedia volumes stacked in random order and watched Lucille dig around the mess on the computer desk. Now and again she came up with a legal pad or a spiral notebook or a stick pin. She put these on his desk. After a while the smells of coffee and bacon drifted into the schoolroom, and Jake's mouth began to water. "Have you had breakfast?" Jake shook his head. He hadn't felt much like eating at his grandfather's. "Can't promise what it is. Nobody got groceries this week, but whatever. You're welcome to have some. We want you to make yourself at home." Lucille led Jake to the kitchen. Randolph was standing at the stove, frowning ferociously and poking at a pan of frying bacon with a long fork, a steaming coffee mug in his other hand. He glowered at them as they came in. A tow-headed boy who looked about 4 years old was sitting on a tall stool at the counter, singing about an itsy-bitsy spider at the top of his lungs. The moment he saw Jake, he stopped singing and stared, his mouth open, his blue eyes wide and round. "Destiny," Lucille said, "the youngest Applewhite." At the kitchen table behind another vase of dying flowers sat Sybil Jamieson, wearing a tattered robe and jotting notes on a yellow pad with a thoroughly chewed pencil. There was a bowl of soggy cereal in front of her. She looked over her reading glasses and nodded somewhat vaguely at Jake before going back to what she was doing. A voice that Jake recognized instantly came from behind the open refrigerator. "Where's the cantaloupe? I distinctly remember that there was one last piece of cantaloupe in here last night." Cordelia emerged from behind the door, dressed in a purple leotard, her hair in a long braid down her back. Jake caught his breath. Even first thing in the morning, she was beautiful. "Mother, Hal's been stealing food in the middle of the night again." There was no answer. "Mother!" Sybil Jamieson looked up. "What did you say, dear?" "I said Hal's been stealing food in the middle of the night." "I wouldn't call it stealing. He has as much right to eat as the rest of us." "If he wants to eat, he can come to meals with the rest of us. I had my mouth all set for cantaloupe." Her mother didn't answer. She was writing again. "Our new student's here," Lucille said. Cordelia nodded at Jake. "Hi." Then she turned back to her mother. "I wish you'd go up and talk to Hal. My morning's completely ruined. I wanted cantaloupe." "Bacon's ready," Randolph said, fishing a piece out of the pan and waving it in her direction. "I found a whole package. You can have bacon and pumpernickel toast." "Oh, right, and then everyone can start calling me Thunder Thighs?" Cordelia took a container out of the refrigerator and poured herself a glass of thick, disgusting-looking green liquid. "I'll be out in the dance studio. My whole afternoon was ruined yesterday, so I'd appreciate if everyone would just stay away and let me work." She tapped the little boy on the shoulder. He was still staring silent and goggle-eyed at Jake. "That means you, Destiny. And those poor little goatsies, too." Then she was gone, the glass of green gunk in hand, and Lucille was offering Jake a seat at the kitchen table. The little boy stared at him intensely as he sat, then climbed down from his stool and came to stand at Jake's elbow. "How did you get your hair that color?" he asked. Even if Jake had intended to reply, he couldn't have. The boy went right on. leaving no time for Jake to squeeze in so much as a syllable. Did it just grow that way? Mine just growed. My hair is blonde. Did you know that they don't got a blonde quan even in a 64 box? I think they should, don't you? Lots of people got blonde hair. What do you call your color? I bet they got a quan for it. I like it. And how come you make your hair stand all in points like that? When I wake up in the morning, mine sticks up sometimes, but not in points. Mommy always combs it down. Can you comb your points down? The boy took a breath and kept going. Does it hurt to have that wing sticking through your eyebrow? It looks like it hurts. How come you got so many earwings? What does your shirt say? Is that a pirate skull? It doesn't have the crossbones like a pirate flag. I like pirates. I want to be a pirate when I grow up, and a painter, and a king. If you... Lucille put down a plate of bacon and toast in front of Jake. Don't mind Destiny. He can go on like that all day. It's better not to get him started, Randolph said, as if it had been Jake's fault. And will you stop that infernal hammering? He bellowed up at the ceiling.